Hi, everyone. I'm excited to see you here for another committee meeting. And whether this is your first meeting or your third, we're glad to have you with us. And before we turn to our wonderful guests, we have some committee business to go over. We're holding our first in-person New York City gathering on November 20th. We're calling it the Happy Hour. You should have received a save the date, and please make sure to RSVP so that we can plan for the right sized space. I'm going to be there, and some of our committee members, our steering committee members, will be there. And I hope to see all our New York members that night. And if you're not in New York, don't worry, because we're planning gatherings in LA and elsewhere pretty soon. So keep an eye out for details. And to that end, we're trying to get a better sense of where our committee members are based. If you haven't yet, please fill out the form that the team is putting into the chat right now, which you should also have received via email, but let us know where you are. And now why we're here tonight and what we're going to learn. So many of you requested we cover how media consolidation and major mergers impact free speech and creativity and media independence, that we decided that we should address this, especially when we learn from the lawyers of this committee that this committee can actually make a difference when it comes to this issue. I assume that most people here have some experience with the fact that giant media mergers can mean fewer opportunities and jobs for creatives and entertainers and journalists and everyone else in the entertainment business. But what's even scarier is that the current administration is exploiting merger reviews to stifle free expression and press freedom and extol control over the content, the viewpoints, even diversity efforts at some of our nation's largest and most influential media and entertainment companies. And it weighs heavily on a lot of us because of how it can affect our livelihoods and because of the existential threat to democracy. And of course, to state the obvious, this is also a particularly scary subject for many of us in the industry, since we're talking about our employers, or to be honest, the people that we hope one day would employ us. But take it from me, there's only one effective way to deal with fear: head on and together. Because when we stand together, we're not small, we become a real force. That's why we launched this committee. And together we can call out and push back against the leaders in our industry who are or will be afraid to stand up to government censorship and intimidation. That's the power of this committee. Thousands of us united by conviction, courage, and the belief that free expression is worth fighting for. We're so grateful to the thousands of members who've already joined this effort and to everyone who's here tonight or who's going to be watching later. Okay, now it's time for us to get educated so that together we can act. And tonight we're lucky to be joined by two of the nation's leading experts on this topic to help us get smart on media consolidation, including Paramount's efforts to purchase Warner Brothers Discovery. I made my first movie at Warner Brothers, and it's really in my DNA. And importantly, the power we have to stand up to free experience, to free expression, and against this line of attack. We have to stand up. The first is FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez, the lone dissenting voice at the FCC, who's been holding the agency accountable for corruption and violation of the First Amendment. Earlier this year, she launched her First Amendment tour to challenge government censorship and control. You know, she's attended 19 events in 10 states to hear from Americans about how the administration's chilling attacks on free expression have impacted their lives. The second is Jessica Gonzalez, co-CEO of the nonprofit media reform group Free Press. And to be clear, we're not talking about Free Press, the incredible, the Barry Weiss's organization. No, we're not talking about Barry Weiss's organization. Jessica has represented pro-democracy and civil rights organizations in opposition to media consolidation for the past 2 decades. And Free Press has a long record of fighting to ensure that media remains accessible to all and democratizing force for good. We'll hear from Anna and Jessica for remarks, and then we're going to do a round of questions from me and a round from you. So type your questions into the Q&A box, and our team will field them. And now, over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jane. I really appreciate being here with you all. I'm so honored to join you. As you mentioned, Free Press is documenting the federal government's escalating attacks on free speech. And we've tracked how this administration is using its merger review power to coerce media entities to tone down or eliminate content that is critical of the administration. For instance, when Skydance was seeking approval of its purchase of Paramount earlier this year, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, launched an investigation into Paramount subsidiary CBS over its very standard editing at 60 Minutes. Carr's predecessor had dismissed this effort as, quote, fundamentally at odds with the First Amendment. The FCC approved that merger in a 2-1 vote. Commissioner Gomez here was the dissenting vote, but only after Paramount paid President Trump $16 million to settle a meritless lawsuit, agreed to appoint a former Trump ambassador as a bias monitor who can censor content, and promised to eliminate all programs supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Shortly thereafter, Paramount fired Stephen Colbert after he criticized the company for capitulating to the administration. Due to the merger, Paramount has announced that it will cut 10% of its workforce, meaning 2,000 people will lose their jobs. The cuts will impact everyone from executives to creatives, hitting film, TV, animation, streaming, music, and CBS News, including the news flagship's Race and Culture unit, which was disbanded. Paramount Skydance's owner, David Ellison, is the son of Oracle founder Larry Ellison. He's close to the president and was briefly the richest man in the world this fall. After taking over the network, Ellison appointed a conservative opinion writer as editor-in-chief of CBS News, despite that she has no broadcast news experience. All of this has had a chilling effect on media independence and creativity. You can't have to think twice about whether or not you can express yourself based on whether the government is going to drop the hammer on you. And we're concerned that administration officials will exploit other mergers like Paramount Skydance's bid for Warner Brothers. That deal won't require FCC approval because it doesn't include broadcast licenses, but the Department of Justice and state attorneys general will assess it for antitrust law violations. In other merger moves, the nation's largest broadcast chain, Nexstar, is trying to buy the fourth largest, Tegna. You may remember Nexstar. When the FCC chair infamously threatened Jimmy Kimmel, Nexstar was the first to pull him on its ABC affiliate stations. You see, Nexstar has to stay in the FCC chair's good graces because its attempt to buy Tegna violates both FCC rules and federal law. So the company is seeking waivers and rule changes and other types of special treatment from the chair. But I'm here tonight because none of these mergers are slam dunks, especially if we work together to hold the line. During the first Trump administration, Free Press stopped a giant media merger that everybody expected to go through. Sinclair Broadcasting Group was trying to buy Tribune Media Company. Sinclair had promised Trump favorable coverage and even forced most of its local news anchors across 185 stations to read pro-Trump scripts while seeking FCC approval of the deal, just blatant corruption. But it could not surmount the public pressure and legal arguments we mounted against the merger, and the FCC ultimately designated it for a hearing, which is the equivalent of the FCC merger graveyard. I have hope today because we're gaining momentum, because millions of people protested when the FCC chair threatened Kimmel. I was outside of Disney Studios in Burbank, as I'm sure many of you were. We heard from Republicans and Democrats in Congress. And last week, Our AG in California, Rob Bonta, expressed concern about Paramount Skydance's bid for Warner Brothers. This is critical because as a state AG, he can investigate and file suit to block mergers. Interestingly, just yesterday, Senator Ted Cruz, who chairs the Commerce Committee, which oversees the FCC, announced that there will be an FCC oversight hearing in December. This after Cruz, who's staunch Republican, said that Carr's behavior, the FCC chair's behavior with regard to Kimmel, was dangerous and straight out of Goodfellas. So this public pressure and scrutiny not only exposes corruption, but it shows other companies looking to merge that the road will not be easy. We at Free Press will oppose the merger every step of the way, but we do need your help. And I have a couple ways here that you can make a difference and a handout that we'll send later on if you want to learn more. The first is just speaking out, lifting your voices. Even being on this call this evening, this has just amplified our message, and it's critically important. Become a member of Free Press. You can do that by signing an online petition or texting Free Press to 78744 or by donating. Free Press is a nonprofit. We don't take a cent from businesses or political parties or governments so that we can remain independent. And we have a lot of lawsuits to file coming up. We'll also promise to keep you updated on how you can get more involved. And of course, reach out to the committee. If you want to do more, the committee can help us connect and collaborate on anything from social media to setting up meetings in Washington. We can prepare you for interviews or briefings, invite you to join protests or rallies, or support your creative ideas. So I thank you all for having me here today. I thank you all for getting involved. I know it's not without consequence because your jobs are on the line, but I do believe that we are fighting for the soul of our country and that we are on the right side of history. So with that, I'll pass it to another woman at the forefront of the fight for the First Amendment, FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez.
Thank you. That was wonderful remarks, and Free Press has been such an important partner in our efforts to call out this administration's violations of the First Amendment. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for the invitation to speak to this group and to explain how the Federal Communications Commission works and its intersection with this community. The FCC is the agency of the federal government that implements our government's laws about communication services. So think TV, cable, radio, telephone, internet, satellite. We're an independent agency, and we have 5 commissioners usually nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate for staggered 5-year terms. The president selects 1 commissioner to be the chair of the agency, and that chair controls the operation of the agency, sets the agency of the decisions it makes, and it directs the actions of the staff. Now, while the commissioners tend to be affiliated with the political party, the majority of FCC staff are public servants that act in an apolitical manner and don't favor one party or another in the course of their work. 3 commissioners are required for a quorum, and the president's party is only allowed to have a bare majority of commissioners, which loosely is interpreted as you need to at least have 1 member from another party. And that would be me right now, since there's only 3 of us right now at the agency. Commissioners vote on rules and on major proceedings before the agency. Important for this discussion, we don't always vote on approving transactions. In fact, I had to demand that the full commission voted on the Paramount Skydance transaction, because otherwise it would have been done at the staff level and would have been even more of a backdoor deal than it was in the end. So as I mentioned, the commission is an independent agency, and it's bipartisan for an important reason. Back in the 1920s, Congress recognized the danger of allowing one person subject to political will to possess too much control over who could operate the cutting edge telecommunications of the time, which was radio. So it created the Federal Radio Commission, and which was the predecessor of the Federal Communications Commission. Now, while the technology has changed, the need for this independence from political pressure has not. And one of our fundamental responsibilities is to license radio spectrum, the airwaves, which are used for television and radio broadcasting. This licensing authority is the crux of the Commission's role in both its review of mergers and its recent actions that are contrary to the First Amendment and the Communications Act. The Commission reviews mergers when they include the transfer of a license granted by the FCC. So we ask, is transferring the licenses compliant with the law and in the public interest? And we look at whether the merger will violate rules such as limits on foreign ownership or limits on the amount of broadcast stations a single entity may own. Historically, the Commission reviews potential harms to the public interest that are likely to arise from the merger. In broadcasting, the public interest typically means localism, which means will the broadcasters serve their communities of license? Viewpoint diversity, which requires multiple owners of broadcast licenses within a market. And competition, so the question is, will the transaction undermine a healthy competitive market? Now, the FCC's merger review is different from other government reviews in a significant respect. The Department of Justice, for example, is subject to a series of hard deadlines, and the merging parties will have the opportunity to challenge their review in court as part of that process. We don't have those timelines at the FCC. We don't follow a set timeline, and the merging parties cannot sue the FCC for action or inaction in a merger before the FCC officially votes. So that gives the chair of the agency the ability to kill a merger without meaningful recourse from the impacted parties. And the threat of inaction, arguably, is what drove Paramount's actions that Jessica talked about in the course of the Paramount Skydance merger. So there's really a lot of opportunity to leverage this authority that the FCC has to authorize these transactions to gain things that I think are inappropriate in the so-called public interest, like requiring parties to eliminate all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs before the FCC will grant a license transfer. And like in the Paramount case, when the Commission approved the transaction after Paramount voluntarily agreed to install a bias monitor, reporting to the Paramount president. So for upcoming mergers, as Jessica mentioned, Warner Brothers Discovery does not own broadcast licenses. So I don't expect a merger involving the purchase of Warner Brothers to come before the Commission. The Nexstar-Tegna merger does involve broadcast license transfers. Now, these licenses are local licenses. They serve local communities. And there's a long history of limiting the number of broadcast licenses that one entity can own. Now, the reason behind this was we wanted to maintain a balance of power between locally owned broadcasters that were expected to understand local interests of the communities they serve and to compete for viewers, and on the other hand, the national broadcasters that were producing content that was targeting the common interests of viewers nationwide. Now, the media ecosystem, as you know, has changed on multiple fronts. National ownership groups include Nexstar, Sinclair, and Gray, and they appear to be focused on expanding their footnote to increase their appeal to advertisers and national marketing campaigns, as well as to increase their bargaining power as they negotiate with cable and satellite providers and the national networks. So the big question is the ability of local broadcasters owned by corporate behemoths to serve the local interests of the communities. Now, if the Nexstar-Tegna merger is consummated, it would actually violate the current Commission's ownership limits. So we don't have a commission before a proceeding. They haven't filed an application to transfer the licenses, and I can't comment on how I will act when it is filed, but it is clear that once filed, they will be asking the commission to either raise the ownership limit or to waive the current rules. And that gives a lot of leverage to the chairman of the FCC, to the FCC, to then make demands for concessions as part of this transaction. So I'm going to turn to my First Amendment tour and why I started it. It became clear early in this administration that this administration was embarking on a coordinated campaign throughout the administration to censor and control information, and in particular, to weaponize its licensing authority, either through the commission or through other agencies, in order to affect how parties talked about the administration. And in the FCC's case, to punish broadcasters and technology companies that are critical of the administration. So starting last spring at stops in DC, California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, Washington, and New York, I have been focusing on shining a light on the ways in which the FCC's actions and the administration's actions have been threatening the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. I've been listening to voices across the country that do not usually engage in FCC proceedings, and I've been encouraging others across the ideological spectrum to speak out and to push back. And I'm still on the road because what we are witnessing within this administration is ongoing and escalating, and I can speak to an important sector of the coordinated actions. The suspension of the Jimmy Kimmel show in September was both alarming and a continuation and an expansion of the actions this administration has been taking since they took control. Now, that instance stood out because the FCC went too far, and the public saw it for what it was and reacted forcefully. The pushback this time also came from Republican lawmakers like, as Jessica said, Senator Thune, Senator Cruz, and Senator McConnell. But it's important to remember that just because the creative community and the public pushed back successfully in this instant does not mean the administration is in retreat. The administration is intent on using its vast power to punish anyone who dares to speak up and to disagree with its extreme agenda. And we are seeing this throughout the administration. We see it at the Department of Defense, which is telling reporters that they have to sign an agreement to only report in the way that it wants to report if they want to actually be part of the DoD pool. We are seeing it in the ways that it is going after lawful protesters for their lawful protests, in the way that they are silencing dissent by prosecuting their perceived enemies. And broadcasters across the country continue to face an impossible choice: comply with the administration's demands or risk a financially debilitating investigation and the threat of a license revocation. And the power to revoke a broadcast license, a power meant to ensure service to local communities and technical compliance, is being weaponized to punish stations that dare to report news in a way that this administration doesn't like. Just ask public media about that. That is not regulation. That is punitive censorship and a regulatory reprisal against speech. And all these actions are part of a larger coordinated effort. In addition to what I mentioned earlier, they are banning books. They are attempting to erase history from the public record and from our national museums. They are targeting law firms, unions, and all those that have the skills and the will to stand up for the victims of their coordinating campaign. So I thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you about this, and I look forward to your questions and expanding on these issues.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gomez and Jessica, that was really a helpful background and overview. And I have some questions. I'm trying to think about what best this committee can do to make a difference. And I can imagine that if the Committee for the First Amendment issues a public letter stating why mergers are bad for the First Amendment, bad for jobs, bad for creativity, is that something that you feel would have an impact and could be helpful?
I think it could make a huge impact, Jane. Some of us have been doing this work for a long time, but when famous people get involved, more people pay attention. It's just the reality. And you all have a special vantage, a special expertise on this issue because you're creatives, right? And this isn't just about the limiting of news content. This is about the limiting of creative expression. So I think you have something important to say here, and I think it would make a huge difference in turning up the heat.
Okay, so we'll work on that. And I guess timing, it would be good if it happened sometime around the beginning of December, maybe. Would that be a good time?
That'd be excellent. There's going to be a hearing on December 18th, an FCC oversight hearing where we hope the FCC chairman will be getting some difficult questions.
Um, Ms. Gomez, during your First Amendment tour, you visited, was it 10 states and heard directly from Americans about the censorship and free expression. What stories or moments really stood out to you the most? Can this issue of mergers being anti-speech and jobs anti-jobs, can this be made to resonate for people who don't follow media policy?
Uh, yes, I do think so. Um, excuse me. You know, it on this tour, and actually we did an event with Free Press in LA early in the tour. And now we're doing another one tomorrow at Rutgers in New Jersey. I'm hearing from a lot of reporters and station owners, local, super local broadcasters, like low power broadcasters, community broadcasters, and they all have the same concern, and that is they fear retribution. They are afraid to report in a way that upsets this administration. And I'm starting to get questions that go like this: am I allowed to say X? And my answer to them is always, I can't tell you what to say. That is not my job as a regulator. It is improper for me to tell you what you decide to say. But the fear is palpable, and there's a good reason for it. Now, how does that tie to mergers? We are seeing the companies trying to curry favor. And by companies, I mean the corporate behemoths of these local broadcasters, trying to curry favor with this administration by altering their editorial decisions, especially with news reporting. So we saw it clearly with Paramount, who voluntarily agreed to appoint this bias monitor reporting directly to the CEO of Paramount, who to field complaints about content at CBS. But we saw it also with the Jimmy Kimmel incident, when Jimmy got suspended, and then the two of the largest owners of local broadcasters throughout the country preempted Jimmy Kimmel after he was brought back by Disney, because they have these pending transactions and they want the FCC to change the rules so they can get even bigger. And so they are happy to muzzle the talent, the content, in order to respond to this administration. So there is a direct tie between mergers and the First Amendment. And another thing that I did want to say is a lot of these actions at the FCC, and when I gave you that rundown, I hope it wasn't too boring, of the FCC and how it does things, I mentioned that a lot of these actions don't have to be a vote by the commission. And by not doing that, you lose a lot of the transparency of what is happening. And these negotiations for these conditions or commitments are happening behind closed doors. So when you shine a light on the transactions, as we were able to do with Paramount Skydance, at least we were able to get a vote where I was able to have my dissent, and it got a lot of notice by people. By shining that light, what you do is you make it harder for the FCC to hide behind its processes and do things in the dark in order to get these outcomes that are basically to censor and to only get content that this administration wants.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jessica, you spoke about the successful fight that stopped the Sinclair merger during the last administration. What lessons from that movement can we use as we face these new consolidation efforts?
We took up that fight because even though everyone said we were going to lose, and there was kind of like a why bother attitude, but we took up that fight because it was wrong. It was in violation of federal law, it was in violation of the regulation, but also we knew that it was going to be bad for media independence. We knew people would lose jobs. We knew it was bad for the public. We filed a detailed petition to deny the transfer with the FCC. But we didn't stop there. We got organized. We had a protest outside of the Sinclair headquarters in Baltimore. There was a lot of public attention. John Oliver, I believe, did a segment on that. And there was a viral video that somebody made, and I hate that I'm not going to remember who it was because this person deserves all the credit, where they showed how Sinclair was forcing their local anchors to read a script over and over again. It was a beautifully done video that really demonstrated the corruption that was at play. And so there was more attention on the merger. And at the end of the day, Sinclair had misrepresented. They'd actually lied to the FCC. They were engaging in some shadiness, and we pointed that out. And I think the former FCC chair really took issue with that. I think that the facts were just too glaringly against the deal. And because there was so much public attention, they couldn't just, slip it under the rug. They had to actually deal with the corruption head on. And I think that's what gives me hope this time around, too. These mergers are on timelines. A lot of people don't know the companies usually set, we have to close this deal by a certain quarter of the year. And so when we slow down the regulatory process and actually force regulators to look at this in a really concrete way, sometimes the deal doesn't get closed in time. And so it gets terminated because of that. There's a lot of different factors in play, not just an FCC decision.
Yeah, I can see that it's really important that what the committee can do is shed light and expose what's happening to the public as much as possible. So hopefully we're going to do that. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up now for questions from the committee members. Type your questions in the Q&A box. And Tessa, do you have a first question for us?
Yes, I do. The first question is from Jess Canty. Do you think the FCC could ever have purview over social media companies? It feels strange that they don't need licenses or have public interest obligations given how central they are to public discourse.
Yeah, so our licensing authority is because we license the airwaves. We don't have airwaves to license to social media companies. And truthfully, our statute that authorizes us and tells us what to do was written in last century with some limited amendments since. So we actually do not have authority to regulate social media content. And in fact, this FCC has looked at regulating the moderation of social media content and basically prohibiting it. And I think that would be a violation of free speech as well. So, we are not only required to comply with the First Amendment, our Communications Act prohibits us from censoring, which is why the actions that this administration is taking are so egregious.
I'll just add, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, actually wrote a chapter in Project 2025. It's a heritage foundation, basically the right-wing playbook. And he articulated a vision where the FCC would take control over social media companies and be allowed to force them to take down or leave up certain kinds of content. So I find that really dangerous. If we tread this way, we need to do so very carefully, even though I take issue with much of what I see social media companies doing right now.
Thank you. Speaking of social media, we've had a few different versions of this question, but this one's from Brad Hicks. Any ideas on how to leverage social media to help throw a wrench in these mergers or rally public support against them? I know the algorithms can be limiting, but there should be ways to slip by the electronic gatekeepers.
Who wants to take?
Content is king.
That's like
Content is king. Good, entertaining content reaches people. Authentic content, we have to, force multiply each other. When enough of us stand up together, it can go viral.
And that is the point of the First Amendment tour. It is to get community together to such a point that we hopefully make this administration think twice.
Yeah, thank you so much. This question is from Katrina Morris. They say, if there are only 3 commissioners right now, isn't it pretty much a given that whatever Trump wants will go through?
Yeah, so sadly, even if there were 5 commissioners, it would still be a majority of the current administration of the Republicans on the commission. So it does, being in the minority means you only have so much influence over the final outcome, but your voice really can be very strong, and that's amplified by the help of folks like you.
Also, in some of these mergers, the FCC isn't the only one reviewing it. So if Skydance Paramount actually does endeavor to buy Warner Brothers, the California State Attorney General, Rob Bonta, can look into it and can file suit to block that merger based on antitrust law. He expressed concern just last week. There are other state AGs who can step in and block that merger. We were also at a deficit of good votes during the first Trump administration, and we stopped that merger. I'm not saying that we'll win, but I'm saying it's not a 0% chance.
Thank
And
you.
it's harder for them, which is important.
Yeah, and I think you just kind of started to answer this, but just to reaffirm from Maria Warner, if the potential Paramount WB merger isn't going to be able to be stopped by the FCC because there are no licenses involved, how can we still work against that?
I think exposing the inherent conflicts in this merger is one way. The just continuing to drive down how this will result in job loss, lack of creativity, et cetera. There are presentations that can be made. We can make an appeal to our state AG in California, and there is a cohort of state AGs from liberal states that have been willing to take up issues like this, and I think that's something we ought to look into.
Thank you. This is from Tom Schaefer. He says, it feels like we started down the path massive media consolidation with the Communications Act of 1996. Knowing it might be impossible to put the genie back in the bottle, can a future Congress realistically promote diversity of ownership?
I do think there are ways to promote diversity of ownership besides having the caps. There's also incentives that can be put in place. For example, there used to be a tax credit for minority ownership of broadcasters, and that was a powerful incentive that ended up giving us more diverse voices in the both traditional sense and in the literal sense in media, and I think that there are ways to do that, and I think it's really important that Congress does get involved in looking at this issue, because we really do need to update our laws.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, this is part of why I think the gutting of public media was so hard to watch, because
Yes.
that was really important. It really sustained independent media. And I mean, don't get me started on ways we could actually play offense, because that's where I'd love to be living right now. Of course, like we passed a bill in New Jersey a few years back that redistributed state taxpayer money to fund local independent journalism in communities, ethnic media, non-English media across the board. It's a small dollar amount, but if we could scale that, we could really do something interesting. It's just about having folks with the political will and the courage to stand up for independent media. And I wonder a lot about what happens on the backside of this really atrocious overreach of this administration and what we can build when people see, wow, independent media really held the line. Where you see, I know Maria Ressa was with you, my friend Maria, I love her, a couple of weeks ago. And you see, the one thing that's different in the Philippines, that's different in Hungary, that's different in other places that have gone into authoritarianism is that they don't have such a robust media environment. And so it's something worth fighting for.
You're absolutely right about public media. I mean, here we are looking at the vast consolidation of broadcasters. We have an FCC that is very willing to lift ownership caps to allow even more consolidation of local broadcasters. While at the same time, we have news deserts all over the country, both because of the loss of newspapers, but now also because we're losing public media. We need local news. We need civic engagement at the localities. We don't need behemoths who are going to nationalize everything that you're going to see at the localities. That is not part of what we consider the public interest at the FCC.
Right.
Thank you. We've received a number of questions along these lines, so trying to summarize them. How does the current administration's approach to the First Amendment and FCC actions intersect with the broader dismantling of DEI? What does that mean for those voices who are protected or suppressed in public discourse?
I like to say that you show your priorities by the first actions that you take. And I think the first action, if not one of the first actions that this FCC under this administration took, was the dismantling of anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion at the commission, and the demand that companies eliminate their diversity and equity and inclusion programs. So we had a diversity committee that gave us a lot of really good recommendations on how to ensure more diversity of ownership of broadcasters. And that committee was dismantled immediately. Our Office of Workplace Diversity was immediately dismantled. And these demands of companies that they cannot provide diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion training, they cannot have affinity groups, they cannot have any type of activity that smacks of diversity, equity, and inclusion by the FCC as a condition to get license transfers is in fact a violation of the First Amendment, given that some of these activities are protected activities under the First Amendment. So there is absolutely a tie throughout for these diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts.
Yeah, I mean, all of that, what the commissioner said is absolutely right. But I have to say, I'm so offended by this attack on DEI. And I actually refuse it to call it DEI because they are against diversity. They are against equity. They are against inclusion. Those are good things that we should celebrate, that we should foster. Those are things that unleash creativity and free expression. And as a Mexican American who grew up in California while Prop 187 was moving through, and remembering how the media actually went after and attacked my community and made me feel like I didn't belong in my own country, it's really infuriating, frankly, to see these attacks on something that was trying to correct a wrong. And for them to say that a DEI program is discriminatory, they know what they're doing here. This is very manipulative. But at the end of the day, they're forwarding an agenda that legitimizes discrimination against women and people of color and others, and that's what they're here to do.
Yeah, as a Colombian American, I share in your disgust and offense.
Thank you both. We've had a few versions of this question as well. Consolidation means fewer shows and films are being made and less investment in creativity overall. How can we convince studios and streamers that this approach is short-sighted and that our creative ecosystem is something worth protecting?
This kind of brings us back to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we are a country and a world that is rich in multiple viewpoints, cultures. When you have too much consolidation, you stop serving all of your markets and you're actually losing money. To me, when you're talking to corporations, you want to talk to their bottom line, bottom dollar. And helping them understand how they are harming themselves is a good way, I think, to address these types of issues.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, this question is from Kelly Stanley. Boycotts seem to be effective, i.e. Disney. Are they a last resort or a weapon of choice, do you think?
Hmm.
Oh, it's so interesting. I've run a lot of boycotts, mostly against Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. But I think it is a way to flex the economic power of a community. I think you only do an economic boycott if you think you can do it well. So that means that you have the reach and you have some buy-in. I think another strain of attack on First Amendment is that Donald Trump and some of his cohort are actually going after entities that have organized boycotts. So for instance, like Elon Musk, we had a the Stop Toxic Twitter campaign, which we launched when he took over Twitter a few years back. And we got over half of his advertisers, including major brands, to pull. And they stayed down, not because we told them to, but because when they were asking him to correct his behavior, he would respond with a poop emoji. So, but at the end of the day, he has sued many of our allies for that boycott. And so that is another way that folks are trying to chill free expression is by going after people who organize boycotts. Hasn't stopped me. I would still launch a boycott. I think what they're doing with these lawsuits is unconstitutional, but we gotta be really smart about how we do it.
Definitely. This question, we've gotten a few versions as well. Can you walk us through how consolidation in entertainment translates into limits on creative freedom? What are warning signs we should be watching out for?
I noticed that I noticed some reporting this week about people inside of Skydance Paramount concerned about changes to the standards department. Basically, the department that says what you can and cannot say. I think we're seeing it already. We're there. We are seeing companies pull back programs. We're seeing companies tell people to tone content down. We've heard from a lot of different folks inside the industry that they've been told to either quash a story or to tone down language. And so anytime we're hearing that while there's this veil of pressure from the federal government, I think we're in a really concerning spot. I think that creatives, I really worry. I mean, the attacks on news are very worrisome, but storytellers help us make sense of the world around us. And so if they're going all the way down to influence what kind of stories we can tell, I think we've hit a very dangerous new low in our democracy.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few more. Jordan King says, Jane asked in the last meeting if there are benefits in perhaps launching some sort of independent media. Would you talk more about merits of independent media?
I just see time and again that independent media is doing more to hold powerful accountable. The nonprofit newsrooms, like have actually sued and won when they were left out of press pools. We're seeing, I think, NPR and PBS continue to report, even though they're under attack. But that doesn't even mention all the small independent outlets that are serving local communities with news and information, helping people understand what's going on, especially as we approach the midterms. We know that our information environments get very clogged, excuse the language, but this was what Steve Bannon, a former Trump advisor, said his media strategy was to flood the zone with shit so that it's confusing and people don't understand. And so having those independent media outlets that can help us understand what's happening and why are critically important in preserving our democracy.
And I think that what we are seeing is consumers have become much more fractured in how they consume news and information, because you're right to address that it's not just news, it's also comedy. It's also social commentary through a variety of means. So independent media is really important. And community media, I think, is going to become all the more critical for critical localized information.
Thank you. We've had a few questions on what we can do in the future when administration changes. What do you hope for the future, and how do you see us getting there?
We're going to have to do some rebuilding, my friends. There are a lot of policies that have been dashed away that we're going to have to rebuild, but I really think it's time to dream. You see, after every major, like how did we get the New Deal? It was the Great Depression. How did we get every major reform has come after difficult periods? And so it is time to be creative and to dream about what we want and to get organized. I think getting organized is key.
I agree. I hear all the time that people are exhausted. They're tired. But it's time to get inspired. We need to think about, okay, how will we do things differently? What guardrails will we put in place to make sure that we don't have this overreach that we're seeing now?
We'll have a whole agenda that we'll share with you. We do it every time we have a new administration. So I promise to share it with the committee.
All of the experts that we've talked to and that we've had on our webinars on authoritarianism have said one thing in common, well, many things in common, but one is we can't just be against. We have to put out there in the ether and to the public what we're for, what kind of future we're fighting for. We're not going back, because back was really bad for a whole lot of people. We're going forward to a better democracy, a new democracy, and we have to project that all the time. So we're working on how to do that as a committee. Maybe one more question, Tessa?
Yes. Just one quick question that's come through. A few people have asked if this is being recorded. So just wanted to let you know it is being recorded, and we will email it to everyone as well as post it on our website, which is committeeforthefirst.amendment.com. But here's an ending final question. A lot of us feel a lot of panic in this moment. Do you think we are at a moment of accepting that we may be sacrificing our careers to speak out, or do we need to plan for the possibility that we may not be able to work for some time? It would be helpful to hear about what it takes to truly have courage in this moment.
Commissioner. Great, tell us.
Yeah, I mean, to set you up a bit, Commissioner, her comrades at the Federal Trade Commission have already been fired. She is one of the sole Democrats left at an independent agency, and she has courageously spoken out for the First Amendment. So tell us how you do it, Commissioner. I want to know.
It is true. I joke, but it's actually not a joke. It is true. Every morning I check my email and I say out loud, am I going into work today? Because this administration has fired Democrats throughout. That they've fired Democrats at the Federal Trade Commission, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. I can go on and on and on. And I have not been fired despite the fact that I have not been quiet. And why have I not been quiet? I am alarmed for our democracy. And so I have to speak out. Not only is it my obligation as a commissioner, when I was sworn in, I swore to uphold the Constitution, but also it's important for our democracy. And I'm fortunate to be in a position And every day that my email tells me I'm still working, I will continue to do so, and I will continue to speak out even afterwards, because we need people to be inspired to speak out.
I also think this isn't going to age well. This
Yeah.
this authoritarian overreach and shutting down of viewpoints. And so I don't know how to advise folks in the industry, but I do know we have a short amount of time to hold the line on democracy. And if we don't, we might see a country that we don't recognize. So the choice is yours, but I really think this is going to age poorly in the long run.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Gomez and Jessica, we're very grateful to you, and we hope we can come through for you and do something that will really matter as a committee. Thank you very, very much. And thank you all who joined us tonight. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. There we go.